Hello and welcome to Featherlight Stories. One new story every Sunday and Thursday. This is episode 1. The Feather. Not far from a young boy's house, visible from his bedroom window, there was a green mountain. It wasn't one of those very high mountains with a pointy, snowy top. There was no snow only during winter. In fact, it had no top. It was just flat, like a giant loaf of bread. It was covered in trees with a few open fields that could be seen from down below. Sometimes cows would graze there. In spring, these fields were colored by yellow, purple, and white flowers. Those attracted a lot of bees, so you had to be careful when laying down in the grass. But now it was summer, so there was no snow, there were no flowers, no bees, and on this day there were no cows. The mountain was quiet. And as the boy and his friends were walking through the forest to the highest grassland, he noticed something white under a little bush that grew next to the path they were walking on. He stopped and got on his knees to get a better look. It was a feather. The young boy had seen feathers before. Orange feathers from chickens at his uncle's farm. Black feathers from the ravens that lived in the trees at the border of his village. Gray feathers from the pigeons that took baths in the fountain at the center of the village. But he had never seen a big white feather like this one. It was almost as long as his arm and as broad as his hand. The boy picked up the feather, which had almost no weight, especially for one that size. Now that he was holding it, he could see how beautiful and shiny it was. The feather was so clean that it looked as if someone had carefully brushed it with water and soap. He showed the feather to everyone and asked what people thought it could belong to. Nobody seemed to be sure, so the boy asked his teacher at school. He said it was too large to belong to any of the birds he knew lived on that mountain. He showed the boy a book and read out the title, Cyclopedia of Feathered Creatures. The boy asked his teacher if it was a book about birds, but he shook his head. Not only birds have feathers, he said. Dinosaurs, for example, had feathers too. The boy knew dinosaurs vanished a very long time ago, so the feather couldn't belong to one of those, or it wouldn't be in such perfect shape. He opened the book in the middle, and pictures showed creatures the boy had never seen before. One of them was a horse with feathered wings. "That's a Pegasus," the teacher said as the boy was trying to read its name. "You see, this one is actually white, just like your feather." Then he turned back a few pages. It revealed an animal that looked like a lion, but its head was like that of an eagle. It also had wings with feathers on its head and wings. "A flying lion?" the boy asked. "Almost. This is called a griffin. The wings have dark feathers, but you can see it has plenty of white feathers on its head and neck. And these are pretty big if you can imagine how big a lion is." He put his hand just above the boy's head. "For sure, this feather isn't too big for that." He handed the book to the boy. "I have to finish some work. Why don't you look for other creatures that match your feather?" So The boy sat down on the floor and went through the entire book, page by page. The only other things with feathers he found were a kind of feathered fox and a deer, both without white feathers. A creature called harpy that looked like a witch with wings but also without white feathers. And, of course, angels that have small, fluffy feathers, not like the sturdy, large ones, similar to what he had found. The boy thanked his teacher for showing him the book and returned home. When he was asked if he had gotten any wiser, he answered, "It can be a griffin or a Pegasus feather." Have you ever seen one of those up there?" He hadn't, but the best thing he could do now was go back and see if the creature it belonged to would return to retrieve its feather. The very next day, which was the second of the holidays, the boy went back to the same part of the forest at the top of the mountain. This time, he went alone, so the creature wouldn't be too afraid to come out. "Griffin!" he yelled. "I have your feather! I want to give it back to you!" Then he waited before calling for the griffin again. He could hear a raven high up on a cliff. Its croaking echoed through the forest. No griffin came that day. The boy was very disappointed, and back home everyone said, "We told you so." The next day he went back and brought his feather with him again. As he stood alone at the edge of the forest, far below he could see his village with its roofs shining in the bright sunlight. "Pegasus! I have found one of your feathers. I want to give it back to you." All he heard were cowbells coming from the fields below. He called out for the Pegasus 3 more times and waited, then returned home with the feather and another big disappointment. "There are no griffins and Pegasi up there," he was told before going to bed. "We looked it up for you, and in fact, your teacher was wrong. Look." The boy was given a picture of a peacock. Unlike all the ones he had seen before, this one was entirely white. All the way from the crest, the little feathers on the top of its head, down to the long feathers that form its tail. He looked at his feather, which was lying on the little table next to his bed. "You see? Now you can go to sleep and dream about other things again." He did dream about other things that night, but the next day he returned to the top of the mountain with his feather. This time he called out, "Peacock! White peacock! I have one of your feathers. If you want it back, please come and get it." He waited and called for the peacock a few more times. It never came. Feeling disappointed again and staying silent for a bit, he realized then, at that moment, how the forest was as quiet as it had been on the day he found the feather. Perhaps, whatever creature it did belong to, it was back here now, and didn't want to reveal itself. He walked back along the sandy path through the forest and found the bush under which he had found the feather days earlier. And without damaging it, he put it back exactly where it came from. Then the boy went home. "No feather?" he was asked. "Did a peacock show up to claim it?" "No," he said. "I put it back where I found it." "Well, sorry to hear that. Maybe we were all wrong then." "No, none of us were wrong," the boy said. "We'll just never know who was right."